Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, is coming to Jerusalem. Everybody in Jerusalem is fleeing from the cities because the traffic jams will be there. No one will be able to move for a few days. We also have a question, is there any spiritual significance to this? And we want to address that issue for you. Actually, I want to do that. We get a lot of letters from friends around the world asking things about our writings and things about going on in Israel. I happened to get a letter from some friends in Hungary, in Europe. And here's some questions they have about Jerusalem. So let's do that as a little background to the spiritual significance of Trump's visit. It says this, what is the spiritual importance of Jerusalem? Why is this city so important for Jews, for Christians, and for the nations around the world? Well, the first thing is just to mention is that the word Jerusalem, the city, is in the Bible hundreds of times. There has to be some importance to it. You can't just ignore it. It's also interesting to note that it's not even one time in the Quran. So to whom is this significant? When you think about the city of Jerusalem, I like what my friend Dan Juster said once, when you think about the city of Washington, D.C., it's not so much a city. The name represents the capital, the government authority of the United States. Well, when you talk about Jerusalem, it's the same thing. It's not just another city. And it has a little different meaning for Jews and Christians and people around the world. What is it? Well, Jerusalem was started as a capital city 3,000 years ago by King David. And so for 3,000 years, the Jewish people have seen Jerusalem as its capital city. And the fact that Jerusalem has come back in the hands of the Jewish people, this is a sign that our nation is being restored. But later on, after David, Isaiah the prophet also had a vision. In Isaiah chapter 2, he said there would be a worldwide kingdom of peace. We understand that to be in the time of the Messiah, a worldwide kingdom of peace, and its capital would be in Jerusalem. In other words, David has it as the capital of the Jewish people, of our nation, but Isaiah saw a prophetic vision of it becoming the capital of a worldwide kingdom of peace and prosperity and joy. So that brings everyone into the picture. And as we look at the importance of Jerusalem, we have to see that those prophecies coming with it. Let's look at, here's another question. The ascension of Jesus, Yeshua, going to heaven, and the Israeli capture of Jerusalem in 1967 happened on the same day, which seems to be on the 43rd day of the counting of the Omer. Did this just happen by chance, or does it have any spiritual meaning? Well, this is taking, quoting from something that I started to teach around 10 years ago. And it's interesting to note that if you look in the book of Acts, it said after the resurrection, Yeshua was with his disciples around 40 days. And then about a week, then he went into heaven, and about a week later, the Holy Spirit was poured out, which means you get to the time that Yeshua went into heaven. We're not sure the exact date, but it seems to be just about that same date on the 43rd day of the counting of the Omer. And that happened to be, is that a coincidence? The exact same date that the Israeli army captured Jerusalem in 1967. Well, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it isn't. But there is some interesting spiritual symbolism in both, because when Yeshua rose into the air, where he was in Jerusalem, and he rose from physical earthly Jerusalem into heaven, which is what? Which is heavenly Jerusalem. So he ascended from one Jerusalem into the other Jerusalem. And on that same day, the armies of Israel came up the hill and went into Jerusalem and captured the city. So there does seem to be this sense of some sort of fulfillment, half in heaven, half on earth, of coming to take spiritual authority. It says also after that in the book of Daniel that when Yeshua went into heaven, he received authority from God for the kingdom on the earth, and then he would transfer it to the Kedoshim, to the saints upon the earth. So it's very significant to note that. And of course, what we note is that all of the events from Passover to Pentecost, which we call in Hebrew the counting of the Omer, in that time, it's amazing. You start, of course, with the crucifixion of Yeshua on Passover, and there's resurrection on the first day of the Omer, and you go all the way down to the end on the 50th day with the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. But in modern Israel, there's events going on with the modern state of Israel that fall in the weeks in between. It's hard to look at that as just coincidence, but we can't say for sure. But it does have a lot of spiritual meaning together. Let's look at this next question. It's the 50th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem, which equals one Jubilee. Does this 50th anniversary have any spiritual significance? Well, let me just explain the question. Of course, Jerusalem was captured in 1967. And what date are we right now? 2007. That's exactly 50 years. So this coming up this week is the 50th year anniversary celebration of the capture of Jerusalem becoming the capital of Israel once again. Now, it's just on this day that President Trump chose to come here. I assume that he got advice that this was the right day to come. I don't know if he understood all the spiritual significance, but obviously that this was the 50th year of the capture of Jerusalem. He's making it a point, and I assume he's making some sort of political statement of connection and loyalty to the people of Israel. But let's not look so much at the political side. Let's look at the spiritual significance at this as well. On this day, so we're having, this is 1967. 1967 was the date that Jerusalem was captured. This year, this week, this day is exactly 50 years from that time. Now, if you go back exactly 50 years before that, what year would that be? That would be 1917, which was an amazing time. That was the time of the Balfour Declaration, when the British Empire declared that they would be in favor of Israel being a homeland for the Jewish people. It was the same year that the British General Allenby conquered Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire, from the Turks, from the Muslims. Exactly 100 years to this day. So if you go back 50 years, it was the Jewish people capturing Jerusalem. 100 years, exactly 50 years before that, it was the British capturing Jerusalem. And it's an amazing time. It was also the beginning of at the time of World War I and the establishment of the League of Nations. So you have that 50-50, 100-year section from 1917 to 1967 to this year, 2017. If that wasn't enough, if you go back 500 years, where do you get to? You get to the year of 1517. I don't know if that makes any difference to you. You'd have to be kind of a history buff to get that. But in 1517, two very significant things took place. One, that was the beginning of Luther's Reformation. That was the start of the Protestant Reformation revolution, whether it was the tacking of his thesis on the church wall. It was a beginning of the Reformation. And it was also the time of the Ottoman Empire conquering the Middle East in that same year, 1517. Which means, what are we coming to today? Exactly this moment, exactly 500 years. Think about it. To this date, it's 50 years from the time of the capture of Jerusalem, but it's 100 years from the time of the British capturing it, and 500 years from the beginning of the Protestant Reformation and the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. So seems like that has a lot of spiritual and historical significance. Well, let's take one more question here. We have, according to the last chapters of Revelation, Jerusalem will see another important unification as heavenly Jerusalem and earthly Jerusalem come together. Well, they're quoting also from an article that I wrote. If you look at the end of the book of Revelation, what do you see? You see the final chapters of the Bible, which is heavenly Jerusalem coming down and being joined to earth, presumably with earthly Jerusalem. So you have another reunification, and not just of East and West Jerusalem, but of heavenly Jerusalem and earthly Jerusalem. And this represents the total completion of God's plan, the joining of heaven and earth together, the reestablishment of the Garden of Eden, a perfect world for the rest of eternity. So that's also something that Jerusalem today is a symbol, a signpost of a hope for a perfect world for eternity. So when you look at Jerusalem, it sort of goes in these stages from the Israeli capital at King David, the prophecies of Isaiah to be a worldwide capital of peace, and then finally, at the very end of the whole Bible, a promise that one day will come a perfect world with perfect people, and that's the ends of God's plan. So, does Jerusalem have any meaning? It sure does. Does this day have any meaning? It sure does. And who knows? Maybe this is why Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, is coming, whether he knows it or not. God bless you, friends.